Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the UE's Defiance and watched something that no human had ever seen before. The alien ships hung in space like giant crystal flowers, each one bigger than New York City. They had appeared 3 days ago without warning, their hulls catching sunlight and throwing it back in rainbow patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "Sir, we're getting another transmission," said Lieutenant Kate Davis from her station. Her voice was steady, but Jake could hear the tension underneath. Everyone on the bridge felt it. This was the moment that would change everything for humanity. Jake nodded and straightened his uniform. "Put it through." The main screen flickered and showed something that made several crew members gasp. The alien looked almost human, but not quite right. Its skin was pale blue and seemed to shimmer like water. Its eyes were too large and completely black. When it spoke, the words came through the translation system in perfect English, but with a strange musical quality. "Greetings, people of Earth. I am Ambassador Valtar of the Zephyrian Empire. We represent the Galactic Confederation, a union of civilized worlds that spans this entire sector of space. We have come to welcome you into our community." Jake had been expecting this moment for weeks. Ever since the alien fleet had arrived, Earth's leaders had been preparing for first contact. He was just a ship commander, but Admiral Beth Cole had made it clear that every human who spoke to the aliens carried the weight of their entire species. "This is Commander Martinez of the Earth Defense Force," Jake replied. "We acknowledge your presence and your message. Our leaders are prepared to meet with you." The alien's face did something that might have been a smile. "Excellent. We have prepared a neutral meeting space aboard one of our vessels. Your representatives will be completely safe, we assure you." 2 hours later, Jake found himself aboard an alien ship that defied every law of physics he knew. The corridors were made of the same crystal material as the hull, and they seemed to glow from within. Gravity worked perfectly, even though he couldn't see any rotating sections. The air tasted clean, and somehow Sweet Dot Captain Pete Johnson walked beside him, along with Dr. Lisa Harper, Earth's best xenobiologist. They had been chosen to represent humanity in this first meeting. Behind them came a small security detail. Though Jake doubted their weapons would be much use if things went wrong, the meeting room was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch up forever. Around a table that looked like it was carved from a single piece of diamond sat 12 different alien species. Jake had studied the preliminary reports, but seeing them in person was overwhelming. There was Ambassador Veltar, still shimmering blue. Next to him sat something that looked like a walking tree with too many arms. Across from them was a creature covered in silver scales that reflected the room's strange light. At the far end sat something that might have been made of living metal, its surface constantly shifting and flowing. "Please be seated," said Veltar, gesturing to 3 chairs that had clearly been made for human proportions. "We have much to discuss." Captain Johnson took the center seat. He was a veteran negotiator who had handled trade agreements with dozens of Earth nations. But Jake could see the strain in his shoulders. This was beyond anything he had trained for. "We are honored by your invitation," Johnson said carefully. "What exactly does membership in your confederation involve?" Veltar's black eyes seemed to light up. "Oh, you will find our terms most generous. Membership brings many benefits. Access to faster-than-light travel technology, medical advances that will extend your lifespans by centuries, energy sources that will power your world forever." Dr. Harper leaned forward slightly. "And what would Earth need to provide in return?" "Very little," said the tree-like alien in a voice like wind through leaves. "You would simply need to surrender your military forces to Confederation oversight. All weapons of war would be turned over to us for disposal." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but kept his expression neutral. Veltar continued smoothly. Additionally, your technological development would need approval from our Science Council. We have learned that uncontrolled advancement often leads to unfortunate accidents. What about our population? Johnson asked. Ah, yes, said the silver-scaled creature, speaking for the first time. Its voice sounded like metal scraping against stone. Earth is quite overcrowded by Confederation standards. We would relocate 90% of your people to suitable colony worlds where they could live more comfortably. The room fell silent. Jake could see Johnson's hands grip the edge of the table. Let me make sure I understand, Johnson said slowly. You want us to give up our military, submit all our research to your approval, and move most of our people off Earth. Precisely, said Veltar, and his shimmer seemed to brighten. In return, you gain the benefits of Confederation membership. No more war, no more disease, no more want. Your people will live in peace under our guidance. Johnson was quiet for a long moment. Jake could see him thinking, weighing options that no human had ever faced before. The alien representatives waited patiently, clearly confident in what his answer would be. Finally, Johnson looked up and met Veltar's black eyes. No. The word hung in the air like a physical thing. Several of the aliens made sounds that the translator couldn't handle, producing only static. Veltar's shimmer flickered and dimmed. I beg your pardon? The ambassador said. No, Johnson repeated, his voice stronger now. We decline your offer. The tree-like alien made a rustling sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps you did. Not understand. This is the offer of Confederation membership. It has never been refused. We understood perfectly, Johnson said, and our answer is no. Jake watched the aliens look at each other with expressions he couldn't read. Dr. Harper was taking notes on a small tablet, trying to record their reactions for later study. Veltar seemed to recover first. Perhaps there has been some confusion with the translation systems. Let me clarify the benefits once more. Extended lifespans, unlimited energy, travel to the stars, ... We heard you the first time, Johnson interrupted. The answer is still no. But why? Asked the metallic creature. At the end of the table, every species chooses to join. The benefits far outweigh any concerns about independence. Johnson stood up, and Jake and Dr. Harper rose with him. Because, Johnson said simply, we choose to remain free. The aliens stared at them in stunned silence as the three humans walked toward the door. Jake could feel their eyes on his back, could sense their confusion and disbelief. Behind them, he heard Veltar call out, We will extend this offer for a reasonable time. Surely once you consult with your leaders, you will reconsider. Johnson paused at the doorway and looked back. Our leaders sent us here with full authority to speak for Earth. The answer will not change. As they walked back through the crystal corridors toward their shuttle, Jake felt something he hadn't expected. Pride. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to be human. Behind them, in the meeting room, 12 alien species sat in shocked silence, trying to comprehend something that had never happened before in their long history of conquest. A species had said no. 3 weeks had passed since the meeting on the alien ship, and nothing had changed. The massive crystal vessels still floated near the moon like giant jewels in the darkness. Admiral Beth Cole stood in the war room deep beneath the Pentagon, studying the holographic display that showed every alien ship in perfect detail. They're not moving, said General Steve Parker, commander of the Marine Corps. He was a big man with gray hair and scars from the border wars, just sitting there watching us. Colonel Amy Foster of Space Command adjusted the display to show energy readings. They're scanning, though. Every few hours they sweep our defensive positions with some kind of sensor array. Beth nodded grimly. She had been expecting this. The aliens were trying to understand Earth's military capabilities. What worried her more were the intelligence reports from Lieutenant Kate Davis aboard the stealth ship U.E.'s Shadow. "What's the latest from our reconnaissance?" Beth asked. Kate's voice came through the secure communication link from orbit. "Admiral, we're picking up a lot of chatter between the alien ships. The translation computer is having trouble with some of it, but the general tone seems to be confusion and frustration." "Frustrated aliens," muttered General Parker. "That's just what we need." Beth pulled up another display showing Earth's defense preparations. Military bases around the world had quietly moved to high alert. The orbital defense platforms were fully armed and operational. Every nation on Earth had agreed to work together for the first time in human history. The irony wasn't lost on her that it took an alien threat to finally unite humanity. "Ma'am," said Colonel Foster, "we're getting word that another alien delegation is requesting permission to land." "Different from the first group?" "Yes, ma'am. These ships are darker, more angular. They're broadcasting on military frequencies." Beth felt her stomach tighten. Military frequencies meant these weren't diplomats. 2 hours later, she found herself in the same conference room where Captain Johnson had delivered humanity's first refusal. This time the aliens across the table looked very different. Where Ambassador Veltar had been graceful and shimmering, these creatures were built for war. The leader called himself War Prime Kreldok of the Vorthen Collective. He looked like someone had crossed a rhinoceros with a tank. His hide was thick and gray, covered in natural armor plates. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding stone. "Humans," he began without any pleasantries, "you have caused significant disruption to Confederation operations. We are here to offer you revised terms." Dr. Carl Wright, Earth's chief anthropologist, sat beside Beth taking notes. He had studied every piece of information they had about alien psychology. His assessment was troubling. These aliens had never learned to take no for an answer. "We're listening," Beth said carefully, Kreldok's small eyes fixed on her. "The Confederation Council has authorized new concessions. You may keep 50% of your population on your homeworld. Your military forces may remain intact for ceremonial purposes. Your governmental structures may continue to exist as cultural institutions." Beth kept her expression neutral, even though every word made her angrier. Ceremonial purposes. Cultural institutions. They were talking about humanity's independence. Like it was a quaint hobby. "And in return," she asked, "you submit to Confederation authority in all matters of real importance. Defense, technology, trade, expansion. The Confederation will handle these burdens so your people can focus on art and entertainment." The aliens seemed to think this was generous. Beth noticed that several other creatures around the table were nodding in agreement. To them, this probably was a good deal. Dr. Wright leaned forward. "War Prime Kreldok, may I ask what happened to your own people when they joined the Confederation?" Kreldok's armor plates shifted slightly. "The Vorthen homeworld was experiencing resource depletion when we were contacted. The Confederation helped us relocate our population to more suitable worlds." "And your original planet?" "It continues to serve Confederation mining operations very efficiently." Beth and Dr. Wright exchanged a quick look. Strip-mined. The aliens had strip-mined this creature's homeworld and convinced him it was help. "We appreciate the revised offer," Beth said slowly, "but I'm afraid our position hasn't changed. We must decline." The sound that came from several aliens around the table couldn't be translated by any machine. It was pure shock and disbelief. "You refuse again?" asked a creature that looked like it was made of living crystal. "These terms are unprecedented in their generosity." "We're sure they are," Dr. Wright said diplomatically. "But humanity has chosen to remain independent." Kreldok's armor plates began to shift and click in what was clearly agitation. "You do not understand the benefits of Confederation membership," Let me show you. The War Prime activated some kind of device, and suddenly the air above the table shimmered. Images appeared showing beautiful worlds with gleaming cities. Alien beings walked through parks and gardens, all looking peaceful and content. This is Nexus Prime, capital of the Nexali Republic. Before joining the Confederation, they were a war-torn system of feuding colonies. Now look at them. The images were impressive. The cities were clean and efficient. The people looked healthy and happy. But Beth noticed something that chilled her. They all looked the same, she said quietly. Pardon? The Nexali people in your images. They're wearing identical clothes, living in identical buildings, even walking in the same patterns. Where's their individuality? Kreldok seemed confused by the question. They have been optimized for efficiency and happiness. What need is there for chaos and difference? Beth stood up, and Dr. Wright rose with her. Around the table, the alien delegation watched them with growing alarm. War Prime Kreldok, Beth said formally, we thank you for your time and for these revised offers. However, our answer remains the same. Humanity declines membership in the Galactic Confederation. But you cannot. The crystal being's voice was almost a shriek. No species has ever refused Confederation membership twice. It is not done. Well, said Dr. Wright with a slight smile, you learn something new every day. As they walked toward the exit, Beth heard the aliens behind them break into what sounded like arguing. Multiple voices spoke at once in different languages, all expressing the same thing, complete bewilderment. Back on Earth, the news of the second refusal spread quickly through government channels. President Sam Rodriguez called an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. World leaders who had been nervous about humanity's first rejection now began to understand the stakes. They came back with a worse offer, Beth reported to the assembled leaders via secure video link. They're not trying to negotiate with us. They're trying to find a way to make a surrender that we'll accept. And if we keep refusing? Asked. The Prime Minister of Britain, Beth, looked at the display showing the alien fleet. More ships had arrived during the negotiations. The force orbiting Earth now numbered over 100 vessels. Then I think we're going to find out what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. High above Earth, aboard the Confederation flagship, Ambassador Veltar received a priority communication from the Galactic Council. The message was brief, but carried the weight of 2,000 years of tradition. Find a way to make them accept. Failure is not an option. The stability of the entire Confederation depends on it. Veltar looked out at the blue and white planet below and wondered, for the first time in his long career, if perhaps the Confederation had finally encountered something it couldn't control. 6 months had passed since humanity's first refusal, and the galaxy was starting to change in ways the Confederation had never seen before. Chancellor Morith of the Inner Circle sat in his command chamber aboard the massive station that served as the government center for 1,000 worlds. The reports coming in from across Confederation space were all saying the same impossible thing. Member species were asking questions. The Nexali Republic has submitted formal complaints about their mining agreements, reported his aide, a nervous creature with too many highs. They claim the terms they agreed to 300 years ago were unfair. Morith's tentacles writhed in agitation. The Nexali had been model citizens for centuries. They had never questioned anything before. What sparked this sudden concern for fairness? He asked, though he already knew the answer. They referenced something called the Earth example, Chancellor. They want to know why humans were offered better terms than they received. The Earth example. That phrase was spreading across the galaxy like a virus. Every day brought new reports of member species demanding to know why the humans had been offered deals that seemed generous compared to the surrenders they had made. Sir, his aide continued, The Helian Federation is also requesting renegotiation of their tribute arrangements. They're using the same phrase. Morith turned to look out at the stars through the massive viewport. Somewhere out there, orbiting a small blue planet, a Confederation fleet was still trying to convince one stubborn species to accept what every other race in the galaxy had taken gladly. The irony was bitter. By offering the humans increasingly better deals, the Confederation had accidentally revealed how badly they had been treating everyone else. What about the humans themselves? Morith asked. Any change in their position? Ambassador, Veltar reports that they have refused our latest offer. We offered them full membership with voting rights and autonomous zones for their population. Morith's tentacles went still. Full membership with voting rights was something that had never been offered to a newly contacted species. Some member races had been waiting centuries for such privileges. And their response? The same as always, Chancellor. No. High Counselor Zex-High of the Arcturian hegemony materialized in the chamber as a hologram. His crystalline form was flickering, with stress patterns that Morith had learned to recognize over their long association. Morith, we need to discuss the human situation, Zex-High said without greeting. My intelligence network reports that 17 different species have begun forming discussion groups about independence. They're sharing information about human resistance and comparing their own membership terms. This was worse than Morith had feared. How widespread is this movement? It's not organized yet, but it's growing. The Theta Centauri Alliance has stopped paying tribute pending renegotiation. The Kepler Syndicate has expelled our oversight. Officers from their industrial worlds. Morith felt something he hadn't experienced in 800 years of rule. Genuine fear. The Confederation had maintained order through the simple principle that resistance was impossible. Every species that had ever been contacted had eventually submitted. The idea that an alternative existed had never occurred to the member worlds. We need to resolve the human situation immediately, he decided. Send word to Supreme Overlord Quantal. Tell him we require his personal intervention. Meanwhile, on Earth, President Sam Rodriguez sat in the Oval Office reviewing intelligence reports that painted a picture of growing chaos in alien space. The information came from intercepted communications that Lieutenant Kate Davis had been gathering from her position aboard the stealth ship U.E. Shadow. Mr. President, said Dr. Maya Phillips, his science advisor, our xenopsychology team has completed their analysis of alien behavior patterns. Their conclusion is remarkable. Rodriguez looked up from the reports. Maya was one of the most brilliant scientists on Earth, and she rarely used words like remarkable lightly. What did they find? The Confederation appears to operate on a principle of voluntary submission. Every species they've contacted has chosen to join them rather than face conquest. They don't actually know how to handle sustained resistance. Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. You're saying they've never had to fight? A war? Not exactly. They've fought wars, but only against species that were already members. Internal conflicts over resources or territory. They've never encountered a species that simply refused to join and stuck to that refusal. This explained a lot about the aliens' behavior. Their increasingly desperate offers, their obvious confusion at each rejection, their apparent inability to simply attack Earth despite having overwhelming military superiority. Sir, Maya continued, there's something else. Our analysis of intercepted communications suggests that other alien species are beginning to question their own membership. Some are even talking about independence. Rodriguez felt a chill of responsibility. By refusing to surrender, humanity hadn't just chosen its own path. They had accidentally started a galactic revolution. What's our military status? He asked. Admiral Cole reports that our defensive preparations are complete. We can't match their firepower, but we can make any invasion extremely costly. More importantly, General Parker believes that any attack on Earth would prove to other species that Confederation membership is actually conquest. The president nodded. That was the real weapon humanity possessed: moral authority. Every species in the galaxy was watching to see what would happen to the people who said no. 2 weeks later, something happened that no one had expected. Ambassador Veltar requested another meeting, but this time he came alone. No delegation, no other species, just one very tired-looking alien diplomat. Captain Pete Johnson met him in the same conference room where humanity had delivered its first refusal. Veltar looked different now. His shimmer was dim, and his large black eyes seemed haunted. Captain Johnson, Veltar began, I come to you not as an official representative of the Confederation, but as someone who needs to understand. Why do you continue to refuse us? Johnson studied the alien carefully. There was something different in his voice, something almost desperate. Because we choose freedom, Johnson replied simply. But what is freedom compared to peace? What is independence compared to prosperity? We offer your people lives free from want, from fear, from death itself. At the cost of our souls, Johnson said quietly. Veltar was silent for a long moment. I have been a diplomat for 400 of your years, he finally said. I have negotiated the peaceful integration of 63 different species. Every one of them saw the wisdom of joining us. Everyone chose prosperity over struggle. And were they happy with that choice? The question seemed to surprise Veltar. Happy? They were content. Their needs were met. Their conflicts ended. What more could they want? The right to make their own mistakes, Johnson said. The right to succeed or fail on their own terms. The right to be human. Veltar's shimmer flickered. Your resistance is causing chaos across the galaxy. Member species are questioning agreements that have stood for centuries. Some are even talking of rebellion. Good, Johnson said, and his voice carried no apology. Good? Veltar's voice rose. Do you understand what you've done? The Confederation has maintained peace for 2,000 years. If it falls, there will be war across 100 systems. Johnson leaned forward. Ambassador, let me ask you something. When your people first joined the Confederation, were they given a choice? Veltar was quiet for so long that Johnson wondered if he would answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. No, we were not. The meeting ended shortly after that. As Veltar prepared to leave, he turned back to Johnson one last time. The Supreme Overlord is coming, he said. Quintal has ruled the galaxy for 8 centuries. He has never been refused anything. Johnson nodded calmly. Then I guess it's time he learned what the word no means. After the alien diplomat left, Johnson sat alone in the conference room and wondered if humanity had just declared war on the entire galaxy. Outside, Earth's defenses waited silently in the darkness, ready to prove that some things were worth fighting for, even against impossible odds. 1 year had passed since first contact, and the galaxy was falling apart. Admiral Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Liberty, watching as the largest alien vessel he had ever seen approached Earth. The ship was so massive that it blocked out stars as it moved, a dark mountain of metal and crystal that dwarfed even the biggest Confederation vessels already in orbit. Sir, reported Lieutenant Kate Davis from her sensor station, that thing is 12 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide. Our computers can't even calculate how much firepower it's carrying. Jake nodded grimly. Supreme Overlord Quintal had finally come to Earth personally. In the year since humanity's first refusal, the situation had spiraled completely out of control. Intelligence reports from across the galaxy painted a picture of chaos that no one could have predicted. The Theta Centauri Alliance had declared complete independence 3 months ago. The Kepler Syndicate had formed a military coalition with 6 other systems, and was actively fighting Confederation forces. Dozens of member species had stopped paying tribute and expelled Confederation overseers from their worlds. Some estimates suggested that nearly a quarter of all Confederation members were in open rebellion, all because one small planet had said no. "Admiral," came the voice of Colonel Amy Foster from the communication station. "We're receiving a transmission from the approaching vessel. The alien leader is requesting a personal meeting with President Rodriguez." "Just him?" "No, sir. He's demanding that all of Earth's leaders be present. He says this is humanity's final chance to join the Confederation peacefully." Jake felt his jaw tighten. Final chance. The threat was clear enough. "Patch me through to the president." Within hours, an unprecedented gathering took place in the Rose Garden of the White House. Never before had so many world leaders assembled in one place. Presidents, prime ministers, chancellors, and kings sat in chairs arranged in a large circle on the lawn. At the center stood a single chair that remained empty, waiting for Earth's most important visitor. President Sam Rodriguez checked his watch nervously. Dr. Maya Phillips sat beside him, her tablet ready to record every word of what might be humanity's most important conversation. Around the garden, the most powerful people on Earth waited in tense silence. The air above the empty chair began to shimmer and distort. Slowly, a figure materialized that made several world leaders gasp in shock. Supreme Overlord Quintal was unlike any alien they had encountered before. He stood nearly 3 meters tall, his body composed of what looked like living crystal that shifted and flowed like water. Energy crackled around him in patterns that hurt to look at directly. When he spoke, his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Leaders of Earth," Quintal began, and his words carried a weight that pressed down on everyone present. "I am Supreme Overlord Quintal, ruler of the Galactic Confederation. For 800 years, I have guided our civilization to prosperity and peace. I have come here personally to end this unfortunate misunderstanding." President Rodriguez stood up slowly. He was a small man compared to the alien ruler, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "Supreme Overlord, we are honored by your presence. However, if you've come to offer us membership in your confederation, I'm afraid our position hasn't changed." The energy around Quintal flared brighter. "You misunderstand the gravity of your situation. Your refusal has caused chaos across the galaxy. Member species that have been content for centuries are suddenly questioning agreements that brought them peace and prosperity." "Maybe they should question those agreements," said the Prime Minister of India, surprising everyone, including herself. Quintal turned his attention to her, and she felt the full weight of his presence. "Do you comprehend what you have unleashed? Wars are breaking out across 17 systems. Trade routes that have been stable for millennia are collapsing. The careful balance that has maintained galactic peace is crumbling." Dr. Maya Phillips leaned forward. "Supreme Overlord, may I ask you something? When you first established the Confederation, was it through conquest or voluntary membership?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Quintal's crystalline form shifted and pulsed with different colors. For a moment, the garden was completely silent except for the sound of wind through the trees. "The early days of the Confederation were different," Quintal finally said. "Species were more warlike then. Some required more persuasion than others." "Persuasion," repeated President Rodriguez quietly. "Is that what you call it?" "We brought peace to a chaotic galaxy." Quintal's voice rose, causing several people to flinch. "We ended wars that had raged for thousands of years. We eliminated poverty, disease, and suffering across 100 worlds." "By eliminating choice?" said the Chancellor of Germany. Quintal spun to face her, energy crackling around his form. "Choice? What good is choice when it leads to conflict and death? What value is freedom when it results in chaos and suffering?" President Rodriguez stepped forward, placing himself between the alien ruler and the other world leaders. Supreme Overlord, we appreciate everything the Confederation has accomplished, but we cannot accept membership under the terms you've offered. Then let me offer you something that has never been extended to any species in galactic history. Quintel's form began to change, growing taller and more imposing. Full partnership. Not membership, but co-leadership of the Confederation itself. Humans would rule alongside me, helping to guide the destiny of 1,000 worlds. The offer was staggering. Several world leaders looked at each other with expressions of shock and temptation. Co-rulership of the galaxy was power beyond anything humans had ever dreamed of. President Rodriguez was quiet for a long time, considering the weight of the decision. Everyone in the garden held their breath, waiting for his response. Finally, he looked up at the towering alien figure. We're honored by your offer, Supreme Overlord. Truly honored, but we must decline. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The energy around Quintal flared so brightly that people had to shield their eyes. When it dimmed, the alien ruler seemed somehow diminished, as if part of his power had drained away. You refuse partnership itself? His voice was barely a whisper. You would rather face destruction than accept what I offer? We would rather face the unknown than surrender what we are, Rodriguez replied. For the first time in 8 centuries, Quintel experienced something he had forgotten existed: helplessness. The realization hit him like a physical blow. All of his power, all of his technology, all of his military might was useless against a species that simply would not be moved. Do you understand what you have done? He asked, and now his voice carried a note of something that might have been fear. You have shown every species in the galaxy that the Confederation can be refused. You have proven that our power comes not from our strength, but from their willingness to submit. Yes, said Dr. Maya Phillips quietly. We understand exactly what we've done. Quintel's form began to fade as he prepared to return to his ship. Before he completely disappeared, he spoke one last time. The galaxy will burn because of your choice. When civilizations fall and billions die in the wars that follow, remember that you could have prevented it all with a single word. Yes, President Rodriguez said to the empty air where the alien ruler had stood. We could have said yes, but then we wouldn't be human anymore. As the massive alien dreadnought pulled away from Earth, leaving the planet's defenses untested, the leaders of humanity sat in the rose garden and contemplated what they had done. They had not just refused an offer of power. They had shattered an illusion that had kept the galaxy in chains for 2,000 years. The illusion that resistance was impossible. High above Earth, aboard his flagship, Quintel stared at the blue and white planet and finally understood something that no Confederation leader had ever grasped. True power could not be taken or given. It could only be earned through the respect of those who chose to follow. And for the first time in galactic history, a species had chosen not to follow at all. 2 years had passed since Supreme Overlord Quintel left Earth in defeat, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. Captain Pete Johnson stood on the observation deck of the new Terran embassy, looking out at the bustling spaceport of what had once been the Confederation capital world. Ships from dozens of different species came and went in peaceful trade, but these weren't the uniform vessels of the old Confederation fleet. These ships showed the individual character of their builders, painted in bright colors and decorated with symbols that meant something to their crews. The Galactic Confederation was gone. In its place had risen something the galaxy had never seen before: a loose alliance of independent worlds that chose to work together rather than being forced to submit. Ambassador Johnson, came a familiar voice behind him. He turned to see Ambassador Veltar approaching, but the alien diplomat looked very different now. His blue shimmer was brighter, more alive somehow. where before he had moved with the careful precision of someone following rules, now there was something that might have been called spring in his step. Veltar. Johnson smiled and offered his hand in the human greeting the alien had learned to appreciate. How are the negotiations going? Better than expected, Veltar replied, his large black eyes showing what Johnson had learned to recognize as satisfaction. The former mining worlds of the Nexali system have agreed to join the Free Trade Coalition. They're eager to control their own resources for the first time in 3 centuries. Johnson nodded. The Free Trade Coalition was one of dozens of new alliances that had formed after the Confederation's collapse. Unlike the old system, membership was voluntary and could be ended at any time. No species was required to give up their military or surrender their independence. Any word from the Theta Centauri Alliance? Johnson asked. They've successfully established their own government and are requesting diplomatic relations with Earth. Apparently, they want to learn more about something they call the human method. The human method. Johnson smiled at that. Across the galaxy, the simple act of saying no had become a philosophy studied in universities and debated in government halls. Species that had forgotten what independence meant were rediscovering the power of choice. Speaking of Earth, Veltar continued, I have a message from my homeworld. The Zephyrian Council would like to invite President Rodriguez to visit us as an honored guest. We want to show him what we've built since we left the Confederation. Johnson felt a surge of pride. The Zephyrians had been among the first to declare independence after witnessing humanity's resistance. Their homeworld, which had been turned into a Confederation administrative center, was now free to develop its own culture again. I'll pass along the invitation, Johnson promised. I'm sure he'd be honored to visit. Back on Earth, Admiral Jake. Martinez walked through the shipyards orbiting Luna, inspecting the latest additions to Earth's fleet. The ships were still small compared to the massive vessels the aliens could build, but they were human ships, built by human hands according to human designs. They bore names like U.E.'s Independence, U.E.'s Liberty, and U.E.'s Sovereignty, reflecting the values they were built to protect. Admiral, called Colonel Amy Foster as she approached with a data pad, we've received another request for military advisors. The Kepler Syndicate wants help organizing their defense forces along human principles. Jake took the pad and reviewed the request. It was one of many they'd received in recent months. Former Confederation species were eager to learn how Earth had organized its military to resist overwhelming force. The irony wasn't lost on him that humanity was becoming famous throughout the galaxy for the wars they hadn't fought. Approve it, he decided, but make sure our people understand they're advisors only. These species need to learn to defend themselves, not depend on us. Yes, sir. There's also a message from Dr. Lisa Harper. She says the Xenocultural Exchange Program is ready to begin. Jake smiled at that news. Dr. Harper had proposed something revolutionary, a program where humans would live on alien worlds and aliens would live on Earth, not as conquerors or subjects, but as friends learning from each other. It was the kind of idea that could only exist in a galaxy where species chose their own relationships. Meanwhile, on the former Confederation capital world, Dr. Carl Wright finished his latest research paper in his temporary office at the Galactic Institute for Free Cultures. The institute had been established in the ruins of the old Confederation Government Center, dedicated to studying and preserving the unique traditions of every species in the galaxy. His current paper was titled The Ripple Effect: How One Species Changed Galactic History, and it was already being translated into 47 different languages. The paper examined how humanity's refusal had not just freed the galaxy from Confederation control, but had fundamentally changed how species related to each other. Dr. Wright called his research assistant a young Nexali who had chosen to study human psychology. We've received responses to your survey from 18 different worlds. The results are remarkable. Wright looked over the data with growing amazement. The survey had asked former Confederation species about their happiness levels before and after independence. Without exception, every species reported higher satisfaction with their lives, even though many faced new challenges and uncertainties. Prefer the struggle of freedom to the comfort of chains, Wright murmured, making notes for his next paper dot in the rose garden of the White House. President Sam Rodriguez hosted a reception for the ambassadors of 43 different alien species. It was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine 3 years ago. Dozens of different life forms gathered peacefully on Earth's soil, not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals. Dr. Maya Phillips approached the president with her latest report. Sir, the final analysis of galactic political structures is complete. The old Confederation system has been completely replaced by voluntary associations. There are now over 200 independent governments, where there used to be one central authority. Any problems with the transition? Rodriguez asked. Some conflicts, as expected, but nothing like the galaxy-wide wars that Quintal predicted. Most species seem more interested in building than fighting. They've had enough of being controlled. Rodriguez nodded and looked out at the gathering of alien diplomats. Near the fountain, he could see Ambassador Veltar deep in conversation, with representatives from 3 different species apparently negotiating some kind of trade agreement. By the rose bushes, a group of former military officers from various worlds were sharing stories and laughing at jokes that transcended species barriers. Maya, he said quietly, do you think we made the right choice? Dr. Phillips followed his gaze across the garden. Mr. President, look around you. 3 years ago, these species were all subjects of an empire that had ruled for 2,000 years. Today, they're free beings making their own choices about their own futures. How could that be wrong? As the evening progressed, President Rodriguez was approached by a small delegation led by a being he didn't recognize. The creature was tall and slender, with silver skin that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. President Rodriguez, the being said in careful English, I am Speaker Zixthel of the Outer Rim Territories. We represent 15 species that were never contacted by the old Confederation. We have traveled here to thank you. Thank us? For what? For showing the galaxy that empires fall when people refuse to accept them. Our worlds were next on the Confederation's list for contact and integration. Because of your example, we were able to form our own alliance and meet them as equals rather than as potential subjects. Rodriguez felt the weight of responsibility and pride in equal measure. Speaker Zixthel, we simply chose to remain free. We had no idea our choice would affect anyone else. The alien's silver features shifted in what might have been a smile. That is what makes it so powerful. You didn't refuse them to send a message or start a revolution. You refused them because it was right. That authenticity gave others the courage to follow your example. As the reception wound down and the ambassadors prepared to return to their ships, Rodriguez reflected on the journey that had brought them all to this point. Humanity had said no to the most powerful empire in galactic history, not because they wanted to rule or conquer, but because they wanted to remain human. The result had been the liberation of hundreds of worlds and billions of beings who had forgotten what freedom meant. In space above Earth, the various alien vessels prepared to depart for their home systems. Unlike the uniform fleet that had first arrived 3 years ago, these ships were as different as the species that built them. Some were elegant and flowing, others angular and practical. Still others seemed to be more art than spacecraft. They all shared one thing in common. They were free ships, crewed by free beings, traveling between free worlds in a galaxy that had rediscovered the power of choice. And at the center of it all, a small blue planet continued to orbit its star, home to the species that had changed everything simply by saying no.